want to welcome everybody to our fifth workshop, submitting the proposal. Our speaker today is Kim Hiscott, and we have an announcement from Sue Colley. But before that happens, I'm going to just do the land acknowledgement. So, B2C2 recognizes that its work and the work of its community partners takes place on traditional Indigenous territories across the province. We acknowledge that there are 46 treaties and other agreements, including unceded land, that cover the territory now called Ontario. We are thankful to be able to work and live in these territories. We are thankful to the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people who have cared for these territories since time immemorial, and who continue to contribute to the strength of Ontario and to all communities across the province. B2C2 is honored to collaborate with Indigenous childcare providers, families, and communities throughout the various territories. B2C2 also respects the calls for action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and their significance to early childhood education and policy. We share respect for the rights of and Canada's obligations to Indigenous peoples. So next, I'm going to let Sue Colley do her announcement.
Thank you, Tara. My name is Sue Colley. I'm the chair of Building Blocks for Childcare, which we now call B2C2. And I hope you have enjoyed these workshops, but we were going to have the final one next week on ideas for financing. The problem is that there are very few ideas for financing beyond the amount of money that the federal government, the provincial government is offering for startup. And that's the $350,000 per 50-child center. So we're still working on how we can actually expand this pool of money so that there can be real capital funding to begin the expansion process. And so therefore we've decided that we would really like to postpone this workshop next week and hold it at a later date, which will of course let you know about when we hope that we will have much better ideas about how capital funding can be secured. And also we're wondering if in the meantime you could send us, if for those of you who are interested in the financing aspects, maybe you can send us some of your burning questions, and that will also help to prompt us about how we, which direction we can possibly go in. Thank you.
Okay, so we have our speaker, Kim Hiscott. Kim is a registered early childhood educator, but is also the executive director of the Andrew Fleck Children's Services, which is a multi-service, multi-site, not-for-profit agency in Ottawa that's been around since 1911, which is pretty amazing. She has had several opportunities in her career to establish new childcare agencies and sites, including new construction projects and renovations of existing spaces. So we'd like to also invite people to type out questions in the chat, and please do that throughout the workshop as things occur to you. And Kim can either get to them during, or we'll have a section at the end as well for questions. So please feel free to do so. And we look forward to hearing your questions and hearing Kim's workshop. So take it away, Kim.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. As Tara said, I'm joining you from Ottawa, where it happens to be quite warm today. Hopefully it's equally nice, or if you don't appreciate the warmth, equally cool wherever you happen to be. So today we have, the topic is thinking about expansion of the not-for-profit childcare and how you could get ready for what is going to become an opportunity, a proposal piece. So I'm going to start by sharing kind of what we know, and then a whole lot of what we don't know, and then what you could be doing to get ready. And as Tara said, please put your questions in the chat, because I want to make sure that I'm responding to what is most important to you. If you do have any burning questions or anything that you want to know, and certainly if we can't answer it today, we'll find an answer, or we'll figure out a way to get you some more information. So what we know is that the province has announced, and they started this exercise last year at the end of the year, what would be the expansion opportunities for the whole province in all different communities from 2022 actually all the way up to, oh sorry, can people not hear me? That I hear that Claire saying she can't hear me. Is it maybe let me try something, just a second.
There, is that a bit better? Yes, okay, good. Okay. All right, sorry about that. You know how in Zoom you can choose different, when you jump from different platforms, right? So if you're in Zoom or Teams or whatever. Okay, so we know that back in the end of last year, the province announced what would be the expansion opportunities, how many spaces would be allocated to each CMSM from, it included 2022, interestingly, all the way up to 2026. And we do know that as of last week, each of the CMSMs and DSABs did receive a letter identifying, kind of confirming what their targets would be and the funding guidelines. But the funding guidelines themselves have not been released publicly. So those we're still waiting, and hopefully they'll be released very soon. Tara is going to put in the chat the link where the guidelines will be posted once they're released publicly, so that certainly I'm sure people will share as soon as everyone is aware that they've come out. But you can always keep checking there because that's where all the memos are posted from the province. But in the meantime, though, lots of the different CMSMs and DSAPs have started processes or have started to at least have conversations. And certainly we've been encouraging from B2C2 that different organizations should be starting to get ready. Thinking about the planning and what could be the opportunities, even in the absence of sort of concrete information, particularly even without knowing what our operational funding guidelines are going to be, it's still an opportunity to get ready. Right, so to be prepared. So the City of Ottawa, I'll share kind of our process. The process the city here has done is they've launched it in a two-phased approach. So the first is an opportunity to submit what they're calling requests for expression of interest. So the idea is that people would let the city know before really investing significantly in planning for expansion, but they could let the city know if they're interested and where they're interested and kind of where they're at in terms of their planning. And these are be the first phase. Then the city would have a chance to review and then put out a second call for proposals for those organizations that seem like they might have a proposal or a project that the city is interested in. And then that second proposal would require a significant amount of depth of detail. But the first proposal doesn't really obligate the center to the agency who's interested in expanding, doesn't commit them to expand. It doesn't promise that they can expand, but it's just basically doing an inventory. Where might there be some expansion interest? So I'm going to ask Tara to just put up on the screen what the questions are that are asked in case these are similar to your community. But even if your community has not started a request for expression of interest process yet, they may very well do so shortly, or some of these same questions may be asked in whatever phase, however your community decides to put things out. So the first piece, of course, is identifying some of the background information. And in Ottawa, there's 3 streams for funding. There's the what they call main or the general population, there's French language, and then Indigenous streams. So there's an amount of spaces allocated under each, and then they're subdivided by areas of the city. But if we scroll all the way down, there's the typical, as you would expect. Here's the background information. All this would just be normal. And then we'll stop here, Tara. Just go up a little bit right here. Yeah, perfect. So the first piece is, what areas did you plan on being located, or where did you think you could be located, and sort of summary details about your organization. But then they get into really the specifics, and this is for center-based applications. So really based on what is your estimated proposed childcare program? What will be the license capacity if you have a sense already of how many spaces? And then would you categorize it as an expansion? So if you are an existing childcare program and you're planning on expanding because maybe you have a room that's unutilized, or you have an ability to add an addition, or you're going to acquire a program, or you're going to do new construction, a new lease, or maybe you don't even know. Maybe you just know that you want to expand, and so you're just identifying that. And if you're not wanting to, if you're wanting to expand but not be part of CWELC, then you would say not applicable. So then question 16 is a nice big box, and it indicates your estimated timelines for the project. So where, if you're going to do an acquisition, a construction, a new lease, when do you think that might happen? Again, if known, because it's understood that, of course, that where everybody is at the very preliminary stages. And then and indicate if you are interested in capital startup grant funding. So I'm going to pause here and just talk about that strange term, capital startup grant funding. So typically in the past, my understanding is that those two words would have been separated. There would have been capital grant funding, and there would have been startup funding or startup grant funding. So now the province has kind of lumped them together. And this is confusing for a lot of us, but I hope that I can clarify how I'm interpreting it. So what we do know is that the province is offering funding of $90 a square foot, and they're calling that piece the capital startup funding, to a maximum of $350,000 for 50 spaces. Per site, I guess. I think if you have more than 50, then you can get more, but that's still unclear. So when you think about $90 a square foot, construction costs now are really ranging anywhere from $400 to $600 a square foot. And I'm a little hesitant to share a number like that. So please just take that with some caution, because of course it fluctuates dramatically depending on where in the province you're located, but it just gives you just a small ballpark to just identify just how distinctly different the capital and startup funding would be. So there's no way that you could finance a renovation, even a leasehold improvement, or new construction from the $90 a square foot. That's not going to cover the costs of creating new childcare spaces. What that $90 a square foot will cover, hopefully, is your startup costs, which would be, you need new tables, chairs, you need the cots, you need dishes, you need some other toy materials, etc. So that's like those kind of fixed or hard costs of things that are non-disposable that we all need in our childcare programs, but it's not going to cover the cost of capital. So yes, in theory, when you buy tables, chairs, furniture, it's considered a capital expense. So that's really not wrong. But when we would think previously about capital funding, we would think more about the bricks and mortar pieces or the actual renovations when you needed to add washrooms. And the $90 a square foot is going to cover more like your furnishings and materials. I would caution it may not even be enough for an effective play space, outdoor play space. Fencing, we know, can be quite pricey, and it might not even be enough to really adequately cover kitchens, because kitchens can actually be quite pricey as well. So all that to say, we need to have some other conversations about costs and financing. But when they talk about capital startup grant funding, don't think that it's going to cover all the costs of creating new spaces through leasehold improvements or renovations. And so we'll scroll down past the home childcare pieces of this questionnaire, because they're not that applicable. And then we'll go back up. I'm sorry, Tara, we went a little bit too far. There we go. I think, yeah, right there. So then this is another place where everyone should be striving to be at before you are ready to submit an application. So it's, a really appropriate question, right? What is your proposed project and status update? And really, what are you planning on doing? How would you describe your proposed program? So this is where you would have in 500 words or maybe even less, depending on the box that your CMSM offers you, where you would describe what you're wanting to achieve. What is your age group? Who are you collaborating with? Do you have a relationship already or space already identified, or a space that you're anticipating being able to do? Is there a particular population that you think that you'll be able to support? How does this relate to your existing waiting list or waiting list that you know of around where you're planning on offering care? Any other kind of community activities that are happening around you? Is there going to be a big expansion of housing, or a new employer close by, that would really justify why this childcare program might want to be co-located here, or be why they should be expanding in that location? And then, is there anything unique about your program as well? So are you offering extended hours? Are you offering an intergenerational program? Any of those pieces, for sure, that's what you would include there. And then the next question, 20, is another one that's pretty big. Now, in the request for expression of offer, I think that all the CMSMs at this phase are not expecting childcare programs to have invested any money in getting ready, but maybe you have. So this is where under readiness, I'll repeat, so things like maybe already starting to have some leasehold conversations with somebody, or maybe you've been working with a realtor to try to find additional spaces, or maybe you've even had a conversation with an architect around what is the feasibility of being able to add on to your building. Certainly identify where your board is at. What kinds of conversations is your board had? What have they voted on? What are they ready to do? And then have you done any of that other work that would actually require a bit of an investment? So have you contracted with an architect to do some concept drawings? Do you have a Class D estimate? Do you have any sense of how much this is going to cost? So that would be what you would want to put in box 20. And then in our case, for the City of Ottawa, the city is actually offering to help facilitate any planning or implementation. So that might be supporting, what is there any building services in your community that could help you, help anybody who could support understanding what might be the ongoing construction costs, those kinds of pieces, if you don't have those resources readily at your fingertips, or even if they've got a breakdown of processes around getting a building permit, those pieces, somebody they could, any information they could possibly share. And then the last few pieces on this page is just any additional information, and then it's just the sign-offs. So we can stop that screen there. And I'm just going to quickly check in the chat because I saw a few things popping up. Yes, we could definitely share, because this is a public document. So absolutely, David, we can share what the City of Ottawa has provided, because you're right, it's probably going to be somewhat of a similar process. So let's say you've submitted your expression of interest, or you're getting prepared for your expression of interest. But I think one of the biggest burning questions your board is going to ask is, how is this going to be funded, right? How are we going to make sure that this can happen? What is going to be the cost? So what we seem to understand from the new process is that the cost for occupancy, which would include any loans needed for leasehold improvements or for new construction, would be coming under your operating costs. And so now we don't have that confirmed, and we don't know what our 2024 guidelines are. So, but in order to prepare, to at least have a sense, you would want to have a really good understanding of what the costs might be before you can even commit. So the next step that you'd be wanting to do as you're preparing between phase 1 and phase 2, or what might be only phase 2, is start to figure out, well, what is going to be your process? What are you going to engage in? A lease, for example? And so if you're going to engage in a lease, where might that be? Who would be your landlord? And what kinds of supports or commitments would they be able to offer? So for example, would they be able to finance the leasehold improvements? And I'll explain what I mean by that. In the cost of your lease. So then that becomes embedded in your occupancy costs. Or would they expect you to finance your leasehold improvement separately? So meaning that you would have a lease cost and then you would have a separate loan. So leasehold improvements are, it's not uncommon for them to be included in a lease agreement, except in the case of childcare, because they might not cover everything. And if you're starting a conversation with a landlord who maybe doesn't know childcare well, you'd really want to be very concrete, because as we well all know who deliver childcare, the cost of creating the space for children, the interior space, even the exterior space, but interior space in particular, can be quite expensive. All those little washrooms, that kitchen, so all that becomes really, really expensive. So you'd want to make sure that if they did embed a leasehold improvement cost, which then is amortized over the term of the lease into your lease, that they've actually accounted for how much it will cost. And then you'd want to start to negotiate a longer lease. So something that's beyond 5, 10, 15, maybe even as high as 20 years or longer, because we know, again, those of us who've been in the childcare sector for a while, typically not-for-profit childcare is pretty stable. We don't tend to move around. We tend to remain in our communities for a pretty long time. And we know that 20 years can snap by really, really fast. And so you'd want to make sure that you've got a good secured lease. You wouldn't want to go all through this, and 5 years later the landlord is saying, well, actually we're done. We don't want to lease to you any longer, because that makes, of course, your program extremely vulnerable. You'd also want to make sure that the materials that are chosen are of a high enough quality, because again, you want to make sure not only is this environmentally appropriate, you don't want to be adding to our landfills, but we also know that children they end up using up materials quite quickly. So you want to make sure you're choosing higher end flooring and cupboards and things like that that are going to last for quite a long time, so you're not again having to go through this process in quick order. So spending lots and lots of time on that initial design phase would be really important, and making sure that you are really sensitive to how much it will actually cost, because realistically, we don't know what the future is going to bring, and you'd want to build into your lease even what would be considered reasonable increases. And so ideally, if you're able to negotiate that it would be cost of living or whatever the ministry offers you in terms of inflationary increases annually, then that's how your lease would increase. That would be ideal, because as you're well aware, now that we're part of CWELC funding, we don't have the means to increase beyond what we're given, right? Once fees are at $10 on average, and most of your funding is coming from your CMSM. If all of a sudden one cost skyrockets, like your lease, if your lease goes up by 10% 1 year, but the inflationary increase offered from the province is only 3%, where are you going to be able to find that difference? And we don't have a lot of extra in our budgets anyway, so that could become quite a challenge for us. So thinking ahead over the whole length of a lease would be really, really key and really important. But then let's say you're thinking of construction. So that's exciting. You're ready to do a renovation or an addition onto your existing space, or maybe you're looking at creating a new building as well. Well, a couple of ideas, couple of thoughts. I sent Tara a list to maybe you can put that up, Tara. So some things to consider around if you were thinking about construction. There's lots and lots of factors to be considering in terms of costs, and things that maybe something you wouldn't have necessarily have allocated enough funding for. So you want to make sure that you're again being really, oh, that's not what I sent Tara. So Tara's going to pull up something else. That's okay, Tara. If you can't, it's okay. I can just ramble on without it, and we can send it to people after. Would that be better?
Sorry, I told you my computer is really slow, so I'm clicking on things and then it's not clicking until my mouse is actually moved. So I was on the wrong one. But give me a second and I will.
Okay. Well, I'll just start. I'll start talking, and then once it arrives, then that's great. One thing that's interesting is in the past, we were not allowed to use capital funding, and I see that's even in a restriction in the capital startup money. Any of those funds, there we go. Any of those funds for that doesn't seem quite right. Can you go to
You want sheet one?
maybe try, yeah,
That one?
there we go. There we go. That's better. So there hasn't been there has not been an allowance to use any of that funding for purchasing land, which is kind of curious because again, no, I guess where are you supposed to as a childcare program be able to find that money? But now I'm thinking that if we have to finance that cost as part of occupancy, then it would be an allowable expense. So here's just a bunch of it's just a bit of a laundry list of costs that you'd want to be paying attention to. And some of them that might not have been, top of mind for you were things like legal fees. There are often a lot of costs around legal fees that maybe are not instinctive. And then there's a lot of soft costs. So yes, we all know about the architect, but then there's also a whole lot of surveys that end up needing to be done while you're also building a new building. And to be clear, I would not be expecting any of us as early child educators to know all of this. So one of my first pieces of advice, and I put them in bold under column B, is adding a construction management fee and a development management fee. So if you were to go out and look for individuals who can support you, you would be wanting to make sure that they were able to manage the project. That wouldn't be reasonable to expect an early child educator, a director of a program, to be managing a construction project and have all of the knowledge of what would be needed to do that oversight, that really deep oversight. You'll definitely learn a lot, and you'll need to be extremely present and active. And so there will still be a role for you, a very important role, but you wouldn't possibly be able to know all that's needed to know. And so I would also encourage under the development management fee to include actually costs to give you some support. So you are going to now be spending some time on this project. And then how are you going to backfill some of your time? So because as energetic as you may be, you still have a program to run, or your program still has expectations of you. And so what kinds of tasks that you need to accomplish could be diverted to somebody else, and then what is the cost of doing that, so that you are also available to this project, to the renovation or the construction project. And that would be included even around the leasehold improvements as well. You'll be needing to make quite a few decisions, and so even though you have a team perhaps helping you, as I said, a construction manager, but you still need to be making lots of decisions. And so how would you make sure that gets funded? So as much as I guess all I'm saying this is because as much as we're enthusiastic to want to see childcare expand, we should also be thinking reasonably about what we're capable of doing and what kinds of supports that we do need. So all of this piece that I've talked about, so getting ready for deciding what kind of space you're going to access, whether it's a lease or whether it's a renovation onto an existing building or construction of a new building, those are questions that you would start to need to have answered in order to be able to fill out the second part, or the phase 2, or what I'm anticipating be phase 2 of your project. The proposal for your CMSM and DSAP, so that you can start to actually negotiate what's going to be your CWELC funding. And so this is the part that's a little bit unfortunate. We don't know how the guidelines are going to work in that regard. But we do know that as not-for-profit organizations, we don't have deep enough pockets to be able to say, oh, okay, well, we'll just take a leap and just trust that we're going to be compensated properly. You will need to have a fairly strong sense as you're going into negotiations, saying, well, yes, we're ready to expand our license capacity or create new license capacity of X number of spaces. And on average, the fees from the parents will be $10 a day. So this is the differential that we're going to need in terms of funding. And it's completely different now than it was previous, right? That's a whole new model. So having a really strong sense of occupancy is really, really important. And so while we're on that piece, occupancy costs, I should say. And so while we're on that piece around budgets, in terms of expansion, we should also be really, we can probably take this down now, Tara. We should also really be thinking about the other ongoing costs. So if, as you're expanding, and again, particularly if you're going to own a building, we've not often, as not-for-profit childcare programs, been able to, based on the way we've been funded, really think ahead about what is going to be our ongoing costs, our extra costs. We've often had to rely on and hope that there's going to be capacity building funding or small grants that our CMSM would offer. So when that dishwasher breaks down, or you need to repair a wall, or some other things need replacing, we've often just waited until there's an opportunity to apply for funding, and then we've applied and received extra funding in that way. I do think we need to be thinking quite differently now. We need to be thinking about all of our replacement costs over the long term. So as as you're planning out your budget, your initial budget, and wanting to do that negotiation, I'd really strongly encourage you to think, what are going to be our ongoing costs? And be really careful to think about them, again, quite expansively. Think about your snow removal, your lawn maintenance, your security, the fire inspections that need to happen. The new one that I just found out about recently was backflow prevention inspection each year. Every possible little cost, you want to make sure that you've got every single one of them included. And that's a piece of work that B2C2 is wanting to do as well, is start to list everything that we should be thinking about, so that either you're making sure that it's included in your lease if you're doing a lease, or that it's included in your new costs, so that we can make sure that because there's going to be no means, right? No extras that we can just say, oh, well, we'll need to charge the parents an extra fee, or we're having this cost, or we'll figure this out. We won't probably have that flexibility. So we'll want to make sure we've thought of every cost up front. Okay, I've rambled on for quite a while. I see that Lorraine has answered, which is great. The consulting services. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Tara. So Lorraine's let people know that that is our intention at B2C2, is to provide some consulting services so that people can have some support as they're thinking about expansion. We want to make sure that the not-for-profit sector is as well prepared and is as confident as possible to be able to embrace this opportunity to grow early learning, not-for-profit early learning childcare for Ontario and Canada's families, but mostly Ontario is of course our focus. And so we're wanting to figure out what resources we need to provide. We're working on a toolkit. We're wanting to be, again, as supportive as possible. Lorraine has put where you can contact us. And then Tara's already put the application from the City of Ottawa on our website so that it's easy. And yes, our focus is on not-for-profit, expansion of the not-for-profit sector. And Sue's going to add something, I think.
Well, I'm quite blown away, Kim, with all this information. It does seem a lot, and I don't have a lot to add. I think that probably this workshop will be on our website, so you will be able to go back and take your time going over all these little pieces. And as Kim said, we are going to put up slowly over time a toolkit with all of the pieces that you're going to need to have available in order to apply for expansion. that's really all I wanted to say. So, but I would really urge you all to ask your questions, because that's really, I think, what Kim is very good at, is being able to get into the into the situations and answer questions, because she has so much experience. And maybe, Kim, you even want to talk a little bit about an example of you know, like the project that you're doing now with the Pearly, for example. Perhaps you that might be a good example to use, or some of the others, the many others that you even did in COVID, I think.
We did. So yeah, I'm happy to share some examples. I'll just, before I do that though, I'll just also reiterate that once the guidelines are out, we definitely will review them, B2C2 will review them. And then if it makes sense, we can always host another workshop as well to kind of unpack the guidelines. Because right now, a lot of the information I'm giving you is kind of in absence. But I'll give you a couple of examples. So first and foremost, the conversation that I've been having with our board for quite some time actually is, is it our interest to grow? And so the board at Andrew Fleck Children's Services was interested. And so we've been sort of planning and thinking what I call our aspirational projects for quite some time. And so we've had our ear to the ground to see who could we be collaborating with? And we've made a decision that we actually wanted to be part of neighborhoods as much as possible, so that we didn't necessarily need to or want to own buildings, even though we do own several, 4 of them. We thought maybe being a part of a neighborhood would make more sense, and doing this in collaboration with somebody else. So Stu's right, during COVID, we actually were building 2 buildings and an addition on a third. And I wouldn't recommend it. During COVID was rather stressful. One of the buildings started, and these were partly funded from the 2018 capital funding, so going back a little ways. One of the buildings, interestingly, came about because there was an existing nursery school that was quite aware in their community that they needed some full-time childcare. And they were aware that a funding or a new project, a capital project to build seniors support and long-term care was happening, and the community wasn't super happy about that. So this really innovative group of parents started meeting with the developer and determined that there was a strip of land, and they told them that they wanted to be able to build on this strip of land. And then they realized kind of what they got into when they approached Andrew Fleck, and they ended up amalgamating with us. So in my very first meeting with the developers, I came to realize that they expected us to buy the land. And oh, no, that's not going to happen. You're going to donate the land. And I explained to them why, because they were building this long-term care right beside. And so here we were going to be able to be childcare that would be able to offer childcare for their PSWs. So fast forward, the building's now been open for a year, 88 children in this wonderfully purposely designed space to be an intergenerational program. And unfortunately, the long-term care that was supposed to be built didn't happen. They ended up not being able to get their financing. And so that land beside is still sitting empty. But it was a really good positive experience for us to be able to build this new building. And we're really excited because we are very, very connected with the community. There's another long-term care home about a kilometer down the road. And then there's some additional there's lots of older adults in that community. And so we have a really robust group of grandfriends that come and spend time every day with the children. But while we're in the middle of doing that, interestingly, we were approached by a couple of others. And so one is the Pearly House. So they're another not-for-profit long-term care. And they too were interested to see, well, how could licensed early learning childcare support their recruitment and retention of employees? But then also what would be the benefits for their own team? And I think that if you have a chance to connect with those kinds of partners in your community, they could be really good resources. Not only do they have buildings and then they can take on some of the pieces around the construction, but they also have a reason to want to see licensed childcare be successful, right? To support their own employees. So that's one of our new ones that we're hoping to have constructed is the Pearly. We've also been approached by actually a number of churches. And churches have land and they're interested in seeing again how they could extend their good work in the community. So we've been having conversations with a number of churches, but we've also said that what we couldn't see at least in the areas where we were looking or where they happen to be located, a standalone childcare program being the best use of that very valuable land. And so we've been involving conversations with not-for-profit housing. So the idea would be to see putting childcare on the ground floor and then not-for-profit housing on the above. So again, we're leveraging the opportunity for the land to be well used and the church to have get some resource, some funding from that, but then also not-for-profit housing and childcare be co-located. So quite exciting opportunity there. And then we're also building in a forest, and it's under construction right now on some National Capital Commission land. And that's another interesting process. That one's been a long time. And when you talk about construction delays, they're real. Some of them have been quite the journey. So when I say though that you learn a lot, you really do. But what's quite interesting is that when you kind of put it out there to the universe and say, gee, we are interested in thinking about expansion. We've also been contacted by a number of developers that are building housing, and to say, well, what would it look like to be have childcare co-located? And that's great. Those are really rich, good conversations. But you have to, my advice is you have to be really clear and articulate about what is best for children and families, because sometimes the developers, they see you offering a really secure tenancy, which is amazing, but then they want to really make your space quite small and your yard space be quite small or not as effective. And so, kind of plant your feet and be really firm about what's going to be best for your children and families, and then you probably can shift the thinking. Recognize that they need you as much as you need them, I think is a piece of advice. And that would be my other piece of advice, even around your conversations with your CMSMs. Like, they need you right now to be expanding. And so, they need you probably even more than you need them, actually. Oh, there's a question. Okay. What's the question, Tara?
So Christine Summers says, hoping this is an appropriate question for this session. We are a cooperative nursery school and are changing to full-time childcare as there is a need. We are currently a non-share and in the works of changing to a nonprofit. We are located in a long-term care and provide care for employees. We are thinking of expanding as there is an empty room next to us. My question is, we are thinking of changing our name. Should we do this at the same time as expansion, changing to a nonprofit, or do we just start a new childcare with a new license instead of revising and changing things with the Ministry of Education and the CRA, etc.?
Yeah, interesting question, Christine. So my first thought would be, do you already have CWELC funding? And if you do, then you don't want to give up that funding to start a new childcare. Because if you start a new childcare, so you probably don't want to. You'd want to instead be able to use your existing, retain your existing CWELC funding for that license capacity and just expand it, right? So you're going to go from part-time to full-time. Changing your name under licensing into a not-for-profit, I mean, it's a legal process, but it's not that complicated. So it would not be worth giving up your current CWELC funding. You wouldn't want to take that risk, for sure. I hope that answers your question. But great that you're already located in a long-term care, and great that there's already empty space. I think that's really exciting. And if you're interested, if you looked at on the Andrew Fleck Children's Services website, we do have a link to intergenerational programming. We did receive some private trust funding to develop some demonstration sites, so there's some resources there if anybody else is interested in intergenerational programming. And we're happy to have any conversations with anybody who would like to set that up, who's interested in intergenerational programming.
So are there any other final questions? Well, I put up a poll. It's kind of interesting. The vast majority of people here are planning on putting in an expression of interest for expansion. So that's great news. There's 9 out of 9 people, 8 said they were, and 1 said they might be. So I think that's interesting. That's definitely an uptick since the first workshop we did. So it sounds like people are making decisions and moving along. So.
And I
And
see
Dave-
David. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Sue.
I was going to say David has a question. Yeah.
Thanks. Hi, Kim. I'm the board treasurer for a center in St. Catharines. We have a toddler group and a preschool group in 2 separate locations. And I was really fascinated to hear about your discussions with developers, churches, and long-term care, because we've also had some of those conversations, but they haven't really gone very far. And I guess my question is, how much work, in terms of time, should we be devoting to basically building these relationships and getting on the radar of like developers and churches and that kind of thing? Like, was this like a major sort of time commitment for you, or was it more of like I guess like a more of a corner of the desk kind of thing?
Yeah, yeah. It's an excellent question. And unfortunately, the magic wand is about timing, isn't it? So, I've found that there's usually quite a bit of interest initially, and we work out a memorandum of understanding, and so we have an agreement to work together. And then, depending that either the developer needs to move forward on their project and there's no confirmation of CWELC money, right, or timing, or you're ready and their project has been stalled. And so I have a couple of examples when I talked about our aspirational projects. We have one, for example, where they're building a pretty significant new development in a really, what I think is an area where there'll be a need for childcare. And we've been working with the developer at the corner of my desk. I will say we've been working on plans. They've designated space, like everything's great, but they're almost at the point now where they need us to commit. And how do I do that? How do I do that when there isn't an approval process yet? And I see from their point of view, it could be quite frustrating because when you're building a building, like you do your plans and you're ready to start construction, you need to know, well, what's this space going to be? Is it going to be more apartments or is it going to be childcare? And the other part that's challenging is that this is for years out, right? These construction projects take years and years. So this one that we're talking to is for 2026, but they need to know now or very, very shortly whether or not we're going to be able to commit. So to answer your question, the problem often is about timing. I think that those relationships are still always worthwhile. One of the advantages to the way, in a sense, the way the CWELC funding is happening is that at least we are talking about projects all the way till 2026. But one of the conversations that we've been having also provincially is that you are going to have to figure out a way to commit to longer term projects. Because we as the organizations need to be able to commit, and if we're going to commit, we need to know that the funding will be there, and that it'll be there based on what the future costs will be, right? So again, for this one project that I'm talking about, that'll be for 2026, I don't know what those construction costs will be now. I couldn't predict what's going to happen in terms of construction for 2-3 years. So will they still cover the full financing costs for construction 3 years down the road? Does that help? I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's helpful. I think we're all facing the same kind of issue where we also got halfway there with the developer, and then I don't know where they ended up. But for my own part, looking at the books, it's hard for me to say that I'm ready to pony up whatever it is, $25 a square foot, $15 a square foot, not knowing what happens after 2026.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really important that I think that's the other role that our not-for-profit boards have, is to be actually articulating those examples to the CMSMs, and then eventually they'll get to the province, because that is going to be the barrier of expansion. they need to understand that projects take quite a lot of time. Even now, when we're talking about 2026, like funding for 2026, there's still probably projects that won't get built just because so using Ottawa as an example, they started this request for expression of interest, and then it's due in June, and then in September they're going to let us know if we're ready for phase 2, and then who knows when they're going to actually approve those. I bet you it won't be until late fall of 2023, and then you start doing your construction drawings. And that's when we've already done other pieces. We've already have, for example, our Pearly project, we already have concept drawings, Class D estimate, we're really quite ready. But the construction drawings and all those pieces, trying to get a building permit, that's all going to take at least 6 to 8 months. And then construction starts. So, all of a sudden, what your idea can take years. And so it's kind of hard for us as not-for-profit programs, right? And I'm trying to align everything.
Thanks. That's really helpful, and I appreciate B2C2 for bringing us all together. And hopefully, we can we can tell the powers that be that we need a little bit more help in this respect. Thanks.
Thank you. Great. Are there any other questions?
Feel free, because it helps everybody. I think if you have a question, it's probably something that other people may have as well. So speak up if you think you have something you'd like to know.
And if not, Tara's put, and Sue, I think, have put, and Lorraine has put where you can contact us. And so certainly ask us questions even afterwards. If you're out for a walk later today and you're thinking, oh, well, I guess I should have asked that, please feel free to do that. Our plan is to keep the conversation going. Anything that you can share around your experience is definitely beneficial to us, and we'll continue to share our experiences. And hopefully all of this will result in lots and lots more not-for-profit childcare spaces for Ontario's children, because the Canada-wide Early Learning Childcare Agreement is still something to get really, really excited about.
So thank you everyone for coming. I wanted to remind people to sign up for our mailing list, because you will get all of the information about new workshops and other programs that we're running, and news in childcare expansion and what the government's doing, and all kinds of stuff on our newsletter. We send out newsletters approximately once a month, and then occasionally reminders that a workshop is on or something like that. And of course, we won't share your information with anyone else. So please sign up for that. And we will be sending out some emails with a survey about how you felt about this workshop later on, so probably next week sometime. So keep an eye out for that. And as Sue said, definitely contact someone from B2C2 if you want to continue the conversation, if you have more questions, if you need some help. That's what we are here for.
And any ideas for additional workshops too.
Yeah, for sure. And I wanted to thank Kim again for doing this workshop. Thank you for sharing your expertise and all of your experience. It's fantastic. And thanks to Sue for being here to answer questions and put her thoughts in. And thanks to all of you for coming. It's fantastic to see people interested, and to see that people are moving along with their projects. Oh yes, here's a question. Will this recording be shared? Yes, when all of the workshops are finished, which is now this week. So next week, pretty much everything will go up online. And we will send out with the email a link to all of those workshops.
And Dave has an interesting suggestion that we could do a workshop just doing case studies, or at least we could have a mechanism to put some case studies up. So we should definitely talk about that as a good idea, because I think the concrete things really help people to figure out whether it's going to be possible or not.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for coming, and hopefully we'll see you again when we have more workshops.